You know how some people are accused of being windy? They go on and on and on. Well, hang in there. I'm going to be windy in this presentation, but it's to tell you about the most important part of getting your bullet to the target: wind deflection of your bullet. Hey, everybody. Bullet wind deflection is a big deal, and we talk about it too little. We're always interested in flat shooting cartridges, powerful cartridges, but we largely ignore wind deflection, and that's usually what screws up our shots. It's wonderful to get out on a calm day or a gentle breeze and make an easy shot. But man, if you're out in the mountains especially, and there's some significant wind, and even as little as 5 miles an hour can be significant enough to blow your bullet off target. We want to find out how we can ameliorate that. How can you reduce the chances that you're going to miss because the wind has blown your bullet? Well, for starters, you need to understand wind deflection and how it works and how much it blows your bullets. And I don't have time to get into all of that, but I urge you to dig into it a bit and understand that a right angle wind is going to be moving your bullet, not just because the wind is blowing it, but because the bullet tries to work like a weather vane into the wind, and it gets a new vector and it moves off target faster than the wind is actually blowing it. Now, some people say, well, just move your bullet faster and you'll defeat the wind. That helps, but it is not the solution. The solution is a ballistically or aerodynamically efficient bullet. It is a big deal. Now, a lot of guys will say sniff, snort. That's a bunch of hooey. BC in a bullet should be called BS. But it's not BS. It really is important. And we're going to look at some numbers here, and I'm going to show you why. Now, if you've got a right angle wind blowing at 10 miles an hour, that means your bullet is moving this way, straight away from you, and the wind is coming from your left or your right shoulder. Those are considered 90-degree or right angle winds. That's where the wind deflection has the greatest effect on your bullet. So the more closely the wind is blowing at a right angle, the more your bullet will deflect. And the higher the velocity of the wind, the more it will deflect. Generally, the ballistic calculators just give you a 10-mile-an-hour right angle wind. And after that, you have to figure out whether the wind is at 45-degree angle or a 20-degree angle or straight at you, in which case you don't worry about it, and what velocity it has. So let's just go with some straight numbers on the 10-mile-an-hour right angle wind. And we're going to work with a little old 243 Winchester. And we're going to shoot it with an 80-grain CX bullet. That's a Hornady all-copper bullet. Has a fairly low BC, even though it has a pretty nice shape, a ballistically sharp nose and a good shape. This is not the bullet, by the way. This is just an example of a 243. But the BC on that Hornady CX bullet is just 0.273, fairly low. But it's a lightweight bullet at 80 grains, so you can drive it 3,300 feet per second. That will help. This is giving us our baseline. So with that right 10-mile-an-hour wind, 200 yards away, your bullet's going to blow 4.1 inches off your aiming point. At 300 yards, you're off by 9.8 inches. That's significant. And a lot of us will take 300-yard shots out in the West or even in the Midwest. 400 yards, 18.6 inches. And 600 yards, 48 inches. 4 feet of wind deflection. Oh, my gosh. So now let's try to improve our chances. We're going to shoot that same 243, but we're going to move up to a 100-grain bullet. It's going to be a Nosler partition bullet. Really effective. The BC on that is a little bit higher at 0.384, but we can't drive it as fast because it's heavier. So 3,100 feet per second is our velocity. But still, we've reduced the wind deflection down to 3.1 inches at 200 yards, 7.2 at 300 yards, 13.4 at 400 yards, and just 33.1 at 600 yards. Yeah, just 33. You have to compensate for almost 3 feet of wind deflection at 600 yards. Another reason we don't want to be shooting so darn far away. Now, let's really improve our chances by going to a higher BC. You can't generally find a 100-grain bullet in a 243 Winchester. That's a lot higher than that 0.384. We can get one at 4.86, but it's a 95-grain bullet. The reason is you start getting these bullets really long and sleekly shaped like this one in a 24 caliber. and it's going to be too long to stabilize in the standard 243 Winchester rifles twist rates. So in order to get that long, sleek, boat-tailed bullet, you're going to have to knock that weight down to 95 grains, and then it'll stabilize. And that's what this Burger bullet does that I looked up. BC of 0.486. Now our 200-yard deflection is only 2.4 inches. 300 yards is 5.5. 400 yards, 10.1. And at 600 yards, just 2 feet. So you've doubled when you go out to that slow, low BC bullet. Doubled the wind deflection. You cut it in half with a higher BC bullet, even though it's launching much more slowly, 3,130 feet per second instead of 3,300 feet per second. This is why it's important to have a high BC bullet if you want to defeat the wind. If you guess the wind wrong, or it switches directions out there, or slows down or speeds up, or any of the things it can do, you're in trouble if your bullet is fairly stodgy, does not have a high ballistics coefficient number. Now I've got one more example, which is a real good one. This is a 115 grain Burger bullet. This might actually be it right here. Extremely long, as you can see. So you're going to have trouble fitting it in your 243 without pushing it down to the powder capacity, but you have other options and other cartridges. But even if we load it in a little 243, that thing has a 0.545 BC rating. You can drive at 2,850 feet per second. You have to have a special fast twist barrel to stabilize it. But if you do, you're going to knock your drift down to the same thing you got with the previous bullet. So what is the point of going to 115? Well, guys like that for the extra energy it has downrange. Now, why did one at 486 BC have the same deflection as the one at 0.545? It's the differences in the velocity. 3,130 feet per second is significantly more than 2,850. So we do need to consider velocity as part of this beating the wind, but it's not as important as the BC itself. And we may see that down the list here with some other cartridges. But across the board, whatever you're shooting, the higher your ballistics coefficient bullet, the better, and the faster your velocity, the better. Both of those work together to defeat wind deflection. Now, how do we make this bullet go faster? How about we load it in a 240 Weatherby magnum? You don't often think of this one or hear about it in the realm of 24 calibers, but it is our fastest one to date. And if you have one, or you have one built, and you shoot that 95 grain Burger bullet in it, you can drive that significantly faster than the 243 Winchester can because of your increased powder capacity. Let's go back to that 95 grain Burger bullet that had a 0.486 BC rating, load it on the 240 Weatherby and drive at 3,300 feet per second. How much difference is that going to make? A little bit, but not as much as some might think, because velocity is not as important as BC when it comes to minimizing wind deflection. So at 200 yards, we're 2.2 blown off course, 5.1 at 300 yards, 9.4 inches at 400 yards, and 22.5 inches at 600 yards. That is only about an inch different from the 243 shooting that same high BC bullet. So I think your first objective is to get to the high BC bullets if you can, and don't worry as much about the velocity. But if you can combine the two, then you're starting to move ahead a little bit. But boy, BC really matters. Now, a lot of us are saying, well, I don't care what the 243 does. I'm shooting bigger animals with bigger bullets, and I want to work with a 308 Winchester, for instance. Kind of the middle of the road cartridge, but it's so popular and used so often. Can we improve performance of a 308 Winchester? It is known as a fairly effective, shall we say, medium long range sniping round or precision target round to about 600 yards, after which it really starts to suffer from a combination of too little velocity and with which to match up with a high BC bullet. Because in the 308 family, a high BC bullet over 5 something, 0.5 something, you're going to get pretty darned heavy, and you've got to get up into the nearly 200 grain bullets to pull it off. And 308 Winchesters just don't push it that fast. But let's see what we can do with some standard stuff in the 308. Go with a 150 grain bullet. We're going to use a hammer copper bullet here. Has a fairly low BC of 0.389 because It's a copper bullet. It doesn't have the mass of lead, and mass is a part of BC. It's not just the bullet shape. It's also its density. So that lighter bullet can be driven pretty fast, 3,050 feet per second, gives us 3.1 inches of wind deflection at 200 yards, 7.3 at 300, 13.5 at 400, and 33.4 at 600. Not too bad, but now let's really prove what wind deflection and BC are doing here with our bullets. Let's go with a stodgy 150 grain round nose bullet. Now, the one I put on the table here is not 150 grains, but it does show you the round nose, and you compare that to a highly efficient, long, sleek bullet. Just looking at that tip, you can see that's not going to do very well in the wind, right? And by golly, the numbers are going to prove it. We're driving this thing, had a BC of just 0.186. That is really low. We're driving at 2,900 feet per second. Now, why is it going more slowly than the same weight bullet that the hammer is? It's because these copper bullets from hammer have minimal surface contact with the rifling. The shanks of the bullet barely touch the rifling. It's almost like a bore rider. And that reduces friction, so you can generally get them to go faster with the same level of powder. So 2,900 feet per second with your typical 150 grain lead core bullet with a gilding metal jacket. You're getting 7.7 inches of wind deflection at 200 yards, more than twice as much as you do with the hammer bullet with a higher BC. At 300 yards, 19.1. At 400 yards, 37.7 inches of wind deflection. And at 600 yards, 98 inches. That's 8 feet of wind deflection. You can understand why the 308 Winchester is not the best for shooting long distance targets precisely if there's any kind of wind. And that's just a 10 mile an hour wind. In a lot of big open country, it blows a lot harder and faster than that. So, obviously, BC matters. There's a lot of guys who say, to 300 yards, BC doesn't matter. It does if there's a big enough jump. If you're going from 0.186 up to 0.389, you're seeing, a huge difference in the deflection of that bullet. So unless you're hunting in woods where you don't have wind issues, or if you are probably not shooting more than 150 yards or so, you probably don't need to worry too much about wind deflection. Or if you're shooting more of a typical 308 bullet rather than a round nose, but this is the partition bullet from Nosler, and you can see it's got a little bit more of a ballistic shape to it, nothing compared to this Burger, but something like that you're going to have a lot more success with, and you probably don't have as much of an issue with wind blowing it too much. But do be aware that this BC matters. Now, one of the solutions with the 308, of course, is to go up in size on your bullet to 168 grain, and the AccuBond long range comes in a pretty effective aerodynamic shape at that weight, and it's way up there at 0.525. So with that BC, we should do pretty well in the wind. Let's drive that thing 2,900 feet per second. I found that in some hand loading manuals. Once again, we're getting down there. We only have 2.5 inches of wind deflection at 200 yards. Just under 6 inches at 300 yards, 10.6 inches at 400 yards, 25 inches at 600 yards. That is not only a huge difference, like 6 feet of difference at 600 yards between it and that round nose bullet, but even with that hammer bullet going faster initially, you've got a significant improvement in beating the wind. So consider those things even at 308. Now, if you love your 30s and you want to go faster and have less wind deflection, of course, you're going to go up in powder capacity to drive that bullet faster than the 308 can. Here we have the new 300 PRC, real similar to the 300 Win Mag. With most of us are familiar with that. What will that one do with the same high BC bullet, that 168 grain AccuBond long range bullet? This one will drive at 3,250 feet per second. What is the difference? Not much. As we saw earlier with that 243, increasing your velocity helps a little bit, but not a lot. So instead of having 2.5 inches of deflection at 200 yards, we have 2.1. You didn't even save a half inch. Get out to 300 yards, it's 4.8 instead of 5.8. You saved 1 inch of wind deflection by burning up that much more powder, suffering that much more recoil. Get out to 400 yards, and it starts to increase a little bit, but 8.8 versus a 10.6, not a huge deal. Then at 600 yards, you've got 21 inches of deflection out of the 300 PRC compared to 25.4 out of the 308. Really, as you can see, it's the ballistics coefficient of the bullet that makes the big difference, not the velocity. Now, the 7 millimeters I have long maintained are kind of the best option for getting good flat trajectory and good wind deflection resistance out of your bullets, because you can shoot 175 grain, 180 grain bullet in a 7 rem mag with the same configurations of the 308 bullets. But to get the same BC out of those bullets, you're going to have to go up to weight of about 210 grains out of your 30 calibers. That means you need more powder to push them to an equal velocity as the 7s, and you're going to get more recoil as a result. It's going to cost you more as a result. And then you're going to get the same bullet performance ballistically. The drops and the wind deflections are going to be the same if the velocity is the same and the ballistics coefficient of that bullet. If those two are the same, it doesn't matter if it's a 7 or a 30. So why endure the extra recoil and burning extra powder with the 30s if you're getting the same ballistic performance out of your 175 grain high BC 7 millimeter bullets? So let's go with the 28 Nosler. That is a monster. That one and the 7 millimeter Remington Ultra Magnum, those push those 7 millimeters faster than just about anything else out there in the 7 millimeter family. So we're going to get a bullet now. This is the ELDX bullet from Hornady, a real sleek one. BC is 0.689. That's really getting up there. You can drive that 3,200 feet per second. Look at what happens. 200 yards, you only have about 1.5 inches of deflection in the wind. At 300 yards, it's 3.7. At 400 yards, 6.7 inches. Only 15.6 inches of wind deflection out of a 7 millimeter out at 600 yards. That's pretty impressive. That's the best number in the whole bunch here, guys. So yeah, speed matters, but BC really matters. That is our highest BC, 0.689. Now, there are some bullets out there with even higher BCs than that. Some of them are getting up into the 7s in the 7 millimeter family, and the 28 bullets, 0.284. You can get there with the 30 caliber bullets too, but I think you're getting up over 250 grains with that. And boy, as your bullet weight goes up, your recoil goes up. Now, some folks will say, well, what about something really big? If weight matters, why not a 338 Lapua Magnum, or a Lapua Magnum, as they prefer to have it called over there? Well, let's drive a 300 grain AccuBond long range with a BC of, did I say something about 7s? 0.785 BC. We're almost up to 8. Wow. But it's such a big, heavy bullet that even with this huge powder capacity, we can only drive at 2,751 feet per second. That's not exactly screaming, but there's a lot of energy in that bullet too. You don't have to drive them all that fast when they weigh that much. So what is our wind deflection going to be on this one? 200 yards, 1.7. Gets beat by 1/10 of an inch by that 28 Nosler. Yeah, similar deal at 300 yards, 3.9 versus 3.7 on the Nosler. And at 400 yards, 7.1. And at 600 yards, 16.7. The 28 Nosler even beats the 338 for wind deflection resistance. So that's kind of the story on wind deflection. I hope it made some sense to you. Once again, if I had to sum it all up, I would say, yes, increasing your velocity helps, but increasing ballistics coefficient number on your bullet really helps the most. That is the absolute best way to do it. And regardless of how fast you drive a high BC bullet, I think we're still all advised wisely to not extend our game shots past 400 yards. I know there are guys out there who can routinely do 600 yards. But once again, no matter how fast your bullet, how powerful your bullet, how wind resistant your bullet, there is always a chance that while it is getting there, the animal can move. And that's one thing you cannot predict. We can estimate the wind. We can use wind meters to read the wind where we're standing, not necessarily downrange. All of that helps give you just a pretty good idea on the wind. But an animal does whatever it wants to do in an instant. And while we're pulling that trigger and sending that bullet, and it's taking its half second or so to get there, the animal could move out of position and you could blow your shot. Well, that's kind of my position on game hunting at 600 yards. Okay, I guess that's about it now. If none of this made sense to you, write in and tell me. But if some of it does make sense to you, more power to you. Do some studying on wind deflection. It really is a big deal, and understanding it is going to help you become a hunter who can hunt honest and shoot straight.